Usually when we talk about a diagnosis, whether it's, medical or mechanical, there's this underlying expectation of engineering level precision.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jaggy white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is. It's binary.
Broken or not broken.
Exactly. It's clean, and honestly, it's comforting. We really like things to be visible and easily categorized, but then you step into the world of human cognition.
Which is incredibly messy.
So messy. Neurodevelopment, and specifically today, the incredibly complex, completely non-binary world of language learning. Suddenly, that diagnostic x-ray machine is just useless.
Yeah, we are looking at a landscape that is profoundly murky.
And if you are currently gearing up for your teaching exam, you don't just have to navigate those muddy waters yourself. You have to prove to an exam board that you can guide 30 adolescents through them.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, when a student stops mid-sentence staring blankly at the ceiling, what exactly are we diagnosing?
Right, what's actually happening in their brain.
Is it a lack of vocabulary? A failure of grammatical syntax? Or is it, just a momentary failure of working memory under stress of performance?
As a teacher, you have to decipher that in real time.
You do. And our goal today is to pull apart the exact mechanics of what happens when a learner hits that cognitive wall, and more importantly, what they do next.
Because just rote memorization of pedagogical terms will only get you so far on this exam.
Exactly. We need to dissect the underlying architecture of these concepts so that they embed themselves naturally into your professional philosophy.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are targeting a massive cornerstone of modern pedagogy today.
We really are. Topic 40.
Topic 40, yes. Communication strategies in foreign language learning and teaching. Let's start right at the bedrock.
The core premise?
The core premise that has to frame any discussion or exam essay you write on this topic. It sounds almost too simple to say out loud, but the ultimate goal of foreign language learning is communication. It is not building a perfect mental dictionary. It's not flawless syntax. It is the transfer of meaning from one human brain to another.
And the central tension of the language classroom, the reality that every teacher wrestles with daily, is the massive gap between a learner's communicative intention and their available linguistic resources.
They have something they desperately want to say.
Right, a complex thought forming in their native language, but the target language resources they have to express it are incomplete or fragmented or just temporarily inaccessible due to cognitive load.
Successful communication, therefore, cannot be defined as perfect, error-free production.
That is a total myth in second language acquisition. Success is defined as the ability to negotiate meaning effectively despite massive, glaring gaps in the system.
I've always visualized this like a digital network. Learning a language isn't just about installing software.
I like that analogy.
It's about what you do when your linguistic Wi-Fi suddenly drops in the middle of an upload. You are mid-sentence, the connection stutters, and the exact word you need just vanishes.
You can't just freeze and let the application crash.
No, you need a fallback protocol. You need a way to reroute the signal, compress the data, or, send it through a different channel.
And those backup protocols, those safety nets that keep the human connection alive when the grammar and vocabulary fail, those are communication strategies.
That's a highly accurate way to model it.
Yeah, and to map that network formally, to move from the abstract to the theoretical framework you need for your exam, we have to look at how psycholinguistics actually defines these fallback protocols.
Right, because the examiner needs to see the academic foundation.
They are defined as the deliberate techniques, the conscious or subconscious procedures that language users employ to solve immediate communication problems.
But who actually coined this?
Yes.
If someone's sitting in front of an exam board, they need the academic anchor, right? They need the names.
Oh, absolutely. The foundational name you absolutely must drop here is Selinker.
Let's spell that for everyone taking notes.
That's Selinker. In 1972, Selinker published a paper that fundamentally changed how we view language learners.
He introduced the concept of interlanguage, didn't he?
He did. He explicitly connected communication strategies to this interlanguage system.
Let's hover on interlanguage for a second, because I think it's one of the most misunderstood concepts. It's not just bad French or broken Spanish, right?
Not at all. If we connect this to the bigger picture of cognitive science, interlanguage is a highly structured, dynamically evolving linguistic system.
It's its own thing.
It is its own unique entity. It's not their native language, and it's not the target language. It's an intermediate operating system that the learner is actively coding in real time.
I love that. An intermediate operating system.
And it has its own internal rules, its own logic, and its own systematic errors. Selinker argued that learners are actively constructing this system.
And communication strategies are the vital mechanisms they use to test the boundaries of that system.
Exactly. When they hit a limit in their interlanguage, they deploy a strategy to bridge the gap to the real world.
Here's where it gets really interesting. For decades, traditional teaching viewed these moments, the hesitations, the weird word choices, the gesturing, through a strict deficit model.
Yeah, it was framed purely as a failure.
Right. Like the student failed to retrieve the correct lexical item, but modern second language acquisition, SLA, demands a complete reframing of this.
It does. These strategies are not symptoms of deficiency. They are evidence of profound cognitive creativity.
Oh, I like that phrasing. Cognitive creativity.
When a learner uses a communication strategy, they are demonstrating cognitive flexibility. They are marshaling whatever fragmented resources they possess.
Syntactic, semantic, nonverbal.
Right, all of it, and reassembling them on the fly to force a meaning across the gap. It shows an active, determined refusal to let the interaction die.
That is a massive communicative strength.
It really is. If you are writing an exam answer, you must make that philosophical shift explicitly clear. Strategies are a sign of active problem solving, not passive failure.
So if we are defining the parameters of this problem-solving behavior, the literature gives us 4 non-negotiable features.
Right, the exam checklist.
Yes. If you are outlining your theoretical framework, these 4 characteristics need to be front and center. Number 1, they are fundamentally problem-oriented.
Right. This means they are not just random variations in speech. They are triggered by a specific, identifiable roadblock.
Like realizing mid-sentence, you don't know the past subjunctive.
Exactly. The speaker's processing hits a snag, and the strategy is the specific cognitive tool deployed to bypass that exact structural roadblock. It is a reaction to an immediate processing deficit.
Which leads to number 2, they have a compensatory function.
They compensate for what the interlanguage currently lacks. They are the bridge between the complex internal intention and the limited external output.
So instead of abandoning the message entirely.
The learner uses the strategy to compensate for the missing grammar or vocabulary, essentially patching the hole in the ship with whatever materials are lying around.
Number 3 is crucial for classroom dynamics. They have interactional value. And this feels like a pushback against the idea that language is just data transfer.
Exactly. Language is inherently social. When a student's linguistic Wi-Fi drops, it's not happening in a vacuum.
There's another human being on the other side of that connection waiting for the rest of the sentence.
These strategies are often deeply collaborative. They involve negotiating meaning with the interlocutor.
Like using a questioning intonation or raising an eyebrow.
Right, signaling to the listener, I'm stuck, work with me here. It's about maintaining the social fabric of the conversation, saving face, and keeping the interactional ball in the air.
Okay, the 4th feature is that they are dynamic and context dependent. But wait, let me play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
If a student doesn't know the word for exhausted, they just don't know it. Shouldn't their reaction be somewhat uniform? Why does the context change the strategy if the internal deficit is exactly the same?
That is a fantastic question, and it cuts to the heart of cognitive load theory.
Okay, tell me more.
The internal deficit might be the same, but the external pressure alters the brain's ability to search for a workaround.
So a student might use a totally different strategy if they're talking to a peer versus talking to a teacher under a time limit.
Exactly. Imagine a 15-year-old student. If they are in the hallway chatting with a peer, the affective filter, the anxiety level is incredibly low.
They have time.
They do. If they forget a word, their brain has the bandwidth to search semantic networks, and they might creatively describe the word or invent a funny hybrid word. They take a risk.
Because the cost of failure is 0.
Precisely. Now, put that exact same student with the exact same linguistic deficit in front of a teacher for a timed, high-stakes oral exam.
The anxiety spikes.
The amygdala fires up, the affective filter slams shut, and the cognitive load of just managing their own panic consumes all their working memory.
In that context, they don't have the bandwidth to creatively invent a word.
No, they are far more likely to just abandon the sentence entirely, switch topics, or freeze. The strategy is never static. It is a fluid negotiation between the learner's proficiency, the task complexity, the time pressure, and the power dynamic with the interlocutor.
Wow, so the environment literally dictates the cognitive tools they have access to. That is a brilliant point for the exam.
It's a huge differentiator between an okay answer and a great one.
So we have this robust theoretical foundation. Selinker, interlanguage, the rejection of the deficit model, and the for problem-solving features.
But theory needs architecture.
Right. If we accept that these safety nets are a sign of creativity, how do we actually map them? Because as a teacher, you can't assess or grade creativity without a framework.
And that requires us to look at the key models that classify these behaviors.
And this is where you must introduce the heavyweight champions of communicative theory, Canale and Swain.
Yes, specifically their 1980 framework of communicative competence.
Before Canale and Swain, language teaching was heavily influenced by Chomskyan linguistics, right? Which prioritized grammatical competence almost exclusively.
It was all about internal rules. Canale and Swain revolutionized the field by arguing that knowing the rules is useless if you can't survive a real-world conversation.
They expanded the map. They said communicative competence isn't just one thing, it's an ecosystem.
An ecosystem is a perfect metaphor. They proposed 4 interconnected domains: grammatical competence, which is the syntax and vocabulary;
Sociolinguistic competence, which is knowing what is culturally appropriate to say;
discourse competence, the ability to connect sentences into a cohesive whole; and finally, the star of our show, strategic competence.
which they placed right on the same level as grammar. That's huge. I like to think of it like a 4-legged stool.
Oh, that's good.
If the grammatical leg is a little wobbly, the strategic competence leg takes the extra weight so the conversation doesn't collapse.
It was a total paradigm shift. Strategic competence is explicitly defined in their model as the mastery of verbal and nonverbal communication strategies.
That may be called into action for 2 reasons.
Right. To compensate for breakdowns in communication due to limiting conditions, or to enhance the rhetorical effect of communication.
By giving it its own pillar, Canale and Swain validated the teaching of survival skills.
They said, effectively, a highly competent language learner isn't necessarily one who makes no errors. It is one who can strategically manage their errors without the conversation collapsing.
So if we zoom in on that pillar of strategic competence, how do we categorize the actual maneuvers a student makes?
Because when I watch students struggle, they seem to fall into 2 completely different camps.
Some fight their way through it, and others just vanish. They just evaporate from the conversation.
And that observation perfectly matches the grand academic classification of these strategies. They are broadly divided into 2 behavioral routes:
Avoidance strategies and achievement strategies.
It is essentially the fight or flight response of language learning.
Let's look at the flight response first. Avoidance. Now, my immediate instinct as a teacher is that avoidance is bad.
Most teachers feel that way.
But isn't avoidance sometimes a highly advanced social skill? I mean, native speakers avoid topics they don't know about all the time to save face.
All the time.
If I'm at a dinner party and someone brings up quantum physics, I am employing massive avoidance strategies. Why penalize a language learner for doing the exact same thing?
What's fascinating here is that you're right. From a purely interactional standpoint, avoidance works perfectly.
It prevents the awkward silence.
It saves face. If a student realizes they don't know the past conditional tense required to tell a specific story, they might just say, oh, it doesn't matter, and ask the other person a question instead.
The communication breakdown is successfully averted. The social interaction survives.
So why is it categorized as a problem in the classroom?
Exactly why.
Because of the long-term cost to the interlanguage. In a dinner party, your goal is just social survival. In a classroom, the goal is linguistic acquisition.
I see.
If a learner consistently uses topic avoidance, message abandonment, or extreme message simplification, where they strip away all the nuance just to stick to safe present tense grammar, they shrink their communicative envelope.
They never push their inner language into the discomfort zone where growth happens.
If you never attempt the hurdle because you cleverly walked around it, you will never develop the muscles to jump. Pedagogically, excessive avoidance leads to fossilization. They get stuck at a plateau of good enough.
Which brings us to the fight response. Achievement strategies.
This is where the learner hits the hurdle, stares at it, and decides they're going to find a way over, under, or straight through it.
They refuse to abandon the original meaning.
Precisely. Achievement strategies are active. The learner is utilizing alternative plans to reach their original communicative goal despite the resource deficit.
This is the behavior teachers must actively encourage. And for your exam, you need to be able to meticulously define the specific subtypes of achievement strategies.
Because these are the exact behaviors you will be assessing in a rubric.
Let's deep dive into these mechanisms, because we don't just want to list them like a dictionary. We want to understand the cognitive gymnastics happening in the student's brain.
Let's do it.
Let's start with Paraphrase and approximation. These sound similar, but what's the actual mechanical difference?
It comes down to semantic networks. In paraphrase, the learner can't access a specific lexical item, so they construct a new phrase that carries the exact same semantic weight.
Like if they forget the word commute.
They say the travel between my house and my job. They restructure the syntax to preserve the precise meaning.
And approximation.
Approximation, on the other hand, is a slight compromise. The learner uses a related lexical item that shares semantic features with the target word, even if it's not perfectly precise.
So they don't know oak trees, so they just say plant or big wood.
Exactly. It's essentially throwing a dart and being satisfied if it hits the outer ring of the dartboard. It relies on the interlocutor to infer the bullseye from context.
Then we get into circumlocution. And I find this one fascinating because it requires such abstract thinking. It's not just swapping a word. It's deconstructing a concept.
Circumlocution is brilliant to observe. The learner loses the precise term, so they have to rapidly analyze the object or concept and describe its physical characteristics.
Its spatial dimensions or its function.
Right. If they lose the word kettle, they have to instantly pull up the semantic features. It's metal, it plugs into the wall, it heats water, it's used for tea.
The electric metal jug that makes water hot.
That requires a tremendous amount of cognitive flexibility and a very high degree of semantic analysis in a fraction of a second.
Okay, here is one that I really want to push back on. Word coinage.
I knew you were going to ask about this one.
The literature defines this as creating a new phonetic or morphological form based on L2 rules. But aren't we just explicitly allowing students to invent incorrect language?
It seems like that on the surface.
Wait, really? If a kid calls a balloon an airball, and I don't correct them, am I not just actively teaching them bad vocabulary?
This raises an incredibly important question about error correction, and it's a trap many novice teachers fall into.
Okay, explain.
Yes, airball is lexically incorrect in standard English. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, look at the morphological logic the student just applied.
They understand that English frequently creates compound nouns by combining a modifier and a root.
Yes. They analyzed the properties of a balloon. It contains air, it is shaped like a ball, and they synthesized a perfectly logical English compound noun.
They executed the software perfectly, they just didn't have the right data file.
Exactly. If you immediately jump in with a red pen and say, no, wrong, it's balloon, you are punishing the syntactic and morphological risk-taking that is the absolute engine of language acquisition.
You want them generating hypotheses about how the language works.
Word coinage proves they have internalized the generative rules of the target language. You can supply the correct vocabulary later, but in the moment, you must validate the strategic logic.
That completely flips the script on how we view errors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what about when they just give up on the target language rules entirely and pull from their native language?
Borrowing or language switching.
Right.
This often happens in bilingual or multilingual classrooms. It's a calculation. The learner assumes we share a first language, so I'll just drop the L1 word into the L2 sentence to keep the momentum going.
Or they might try to phonologically adapt an L1 word to make it sound like the L2.
It's a valid strategy, particularly in what we now call translanguaging contexts, where moving fluidly between linguistic repertoires is seen as a communicative asset rather than a deficit.
And then there's explicit appeal for assistance. Just stopping and saying, how do you say?
Which is pure, unadulterated negotiation of meaning.
It requires metacognitive awareness, knowing that you don't know.
And the social confidence to ask for the input you need.
Finally, we have mime and gesture. And I want to elevate this beyond just pointing at things.
Please do.
A high schooler pointing at a clock isn't exactly groundbreaking pedagogy. But there is a deep psycholinguistic basis for nonverbal strategy, isn't there?
Absolutely. If you really want to impress an examiner, you connect mime and gesture to multimodal communication theories, like McNeil's gesture theory.
Gestures are not just pantomime for the benefit of the listener.
Research shows that gesturing actually helps the speaker retrieve words from their own mental lexicon. The physical movement reduces the cognitive load on the verbal processing centers.
Oh, wow. When a student is struggling for a word and starts making wild hand motions, they aren't just trying to play charades.
They are physically trying to jog their own semantic memory. It is a deeply integrated part of the cognitive system.
So we have this incredible toolkit: paraphrase, approximation, circumlocution, coinage, borrowing, appealing, and multimodality.
That gives us our theoretical map and our Canali and Swain categorization.
Now we have to pivot. We have to move from the psycholinguistic brain into the noisy reality of a Monday morning classroom.
The fun part.
What are the actual implications for teaching? How does a teacher take all this invisible cognitive theory and make it visible and actionable?
The primary implication for teaching is recognizing that these strategies are the very mechanism that drives language acquisition forward.
We discussed this briefly with the avoidance versus achievement concept.
But it fundamentally relies on the concept of noticing, a theory heavily promoted by Richard Schmidt.
Let's trace the anatomy of that. How does a student using a strategy lead to them actually acquiring new grammar or vocabulary?
It creates a specific type of vulnerability. When a learner uses an achievement strategy, say, they use an elaborate circumlocution to describe a stapler because they lack the word.
They are acutely aware in that exact millisecond that they have a gap in their knowledge.
Their cognitive focus is laser targeted on that missing piece. When the teacher or a peer responds and naturally supplies the correct word.
I'll pass you the stapler.
Exactly. The learner experiences a profound moment of noticing. They instantly map the new input, stapler, onto the conceptual hole they just dug with their circumlocution.
Because the input arrived precisely at the moment of highest communicative need.
The retention rate is exponentially higher than if they just read the word on a flashcard.
It's kind of like heating up the metal before you strike it. The brain is primed to fuse with the new information.
And this connects directly to Merrill Swain's output hypothesis. Right?
The idea that we don't just learn by listening. We learn by being forced to produce language.
Precisely. Strategies emerge when output is pushed. If a student is never forced to articulate complex, unscripted thoughts, they will never realize what they don't know.
Pushing output forces them into the strategic zone where noticing and acquisition happen. So what does this all mean for the student's mental state? Because pushing a teenager to speak in a language they barely know, to struggle publicly, is a recipe for massive anxiety.
And that is exactly why teaching strategic competence explicitly is so vital. We can look at Stephen Krashen's effective filter hypothesis.
When anxiety is high, the filter goes up and language acquisition shuts down.
The prefrontal cortex essentially blocks access to the linguistic resources. What does a student fear most? Looking foolish, freezing up, having the conversation die in front of their peers.
When a teacher equips them with a robust toolkit of achievement strategies, they are handing them a safety net.
You're teaching them how to fall safely.
Exactly. When a student knows they have 6 different ways to survive a forgotten word, they can gesture, they can circumlocute, they can paraphrase, the fear of the breakdown evaporates.
The effective filter lowers.
And with that lowered anxiety comes an immense surge in learner autonomy. They stop looking at the teacher with panic in their eyes every time they stumble.
They realize they are capable of managing meaning on their own. They transform from passive receivers of vocabulary to active navigators of interaction.
Now, if we're tailoring this deep dive to an exam answer specifically regarding secondary education, we need to talk about teenagers. The sources highlight that adolescents require a specific pedagogical approach to these strategies.
Why is that?
It relates directly to Piaget's stages of cognitive development. Adolescents are in or entering the formal operational stage.
They possess the cognitive maturity for high-level metacognitive reflection.
They can think critically about their own thought processes. You can't ask a 6-year-old to analyze why they chose a specific paraphrase over a circumlocution.
They just do it intuitively.
But a 15-year-old can absolutely analyze their own strategic behavior.
So the teaching shouldn't just be incidental. It shouldn't just be hidden while playing a vocabulary game.
No, it must be explicit. The teacher must pull back the curtain. You have to model the strategies out loud.
A teacher might deliberately fake a memory lapse in the target language and perform a think-aloud protocol.
I can't remember the word for ceiling. What can I do? Okay, I'll use the opposite. It's the opposite of the floor.
You explicitly name the strategy. Then you design activities where students practice it, and crucially, you follow up with guided reflection on why a strategy worked.
Why did you choose that workaround? Did your partner understand you? What was the most efficient way to bypass that missing verb?
Exactly. You bring the subconscious survival mechanisms into the conscious analytical realm so they can deploy them deliberately.
Okay, we have the theory, we have the models, and we have the psychological implications. Now we arrive at the crucible.
Classroom application and assessment.
This is where theory proves its worth. The examiner reading this essay wants to know that you, the candidate, can design a lesson plan on a Wednesday morning that actually forces this strategic competence out of your students.
We need concrete mechanics. What do these activities look like?
The cardinal rule for designing a classroom activity targeting strategic competence is that it must generate genuine communicative pressure.
If students are just reading dialogues from a textbook, there is no pressure, no unpredictability, and therefore no need for strategies.
You must create an information asymmetry.
Which brings us to the classic information gap activities.
But let's not just list it. How does a teacher build a high-quality information gap?
You structure a task where student A has half the vital information and student B has the other half.
And the only way to complete the objective, say plotting a route on a map or identifying a specific suspect in a lineup, is to communicate.
But to make it force strategy use, you have to engineer the difficulty. If student A has a picture of a bizarre, complex geometric shape and student B has to draw it, student A will inevitably lack the precise geometric vocabulary.
They are forced into circumlocution, approximation, and negotiation.
No, not a square. It's like a square, but someone pushed the sides.
Student B has to constantly request clarification. Do you mean a diamond? Do you mean a rhombus? The gap forces the strategic machinery to turn.
Role plays and simulations are another staple, but again, how do we push them beyond reciting memorized scripts?
You introduce sudden, unscripted complications. You set up a role play. A student is returning a defective sweater to a store clerk. They prep their vocabulary.
But halfway through the interaction, you slip the clerk a card that says, accuse the customer of intentionally ruining the sweater.
Suddenly, the memorized script is useless. The linguistic demands spike. The cognitive load increases, and the student is forced to deploy real-time achievement strategies to defend themselves and maintain the interaction.
It replicates the beautiful chaos of real-world communication.
And the sources heavily emphasize digital tools and online interaction. How does the digital landscape change strategic competence? Because communicating over video or text is fundamentally different than face-to-face.
It introduces entirely new layers of strategic management. Think about a collaborative project done over video conferencing.
Students are managing meaning not just with words, but with shared screens, digital whiteboards, and text chat side channels.
If the audio lags, they have to instantly switch modalities, typing a clarification in the chat or using the raise hand emoji to manage turn-taking.
They are utilizing digital affordances as compensatory strategies.
Navigating a frozen screen or a dropped connection in a foreign language requires immense strategic competence. It is an incredibly authentic arena for modern language learners, and citing it shows the examiner you are teaching for the 21st century.
All right, the activities are brilliant. But here is the massive looming paradox of this entire topic, and it's something the listener must address head-on in their exam.
Assessment.
Assessment. As teachers, we are neurologically wired to grade what is visible, which usually means grading accuracy.
Red pen for bad grammar, green check for good vocabulary.
Isn't it incredibly hard to grade someone on how well they manage not knowing something?
It requires a complete fundamental shift in your assessment paradigm. If you judge a circumlocution task with a grammar rubric, everyone fails.
What's fascinating here is that you have to train yourself to look past the syntactic errors and evaluate the strategic behavior embedded within the performance.
So what are the actionable metrics? What is the teacher actually looking for with the clipboard in hand?
You are evaluating interactional maintenance. Did the student keep the conversational ball in the air, or did they freeze and let it drop?
You are looking for active repair mechanisms. When their partner looked confused, did they immediately recognize the breakdown and deploy a paraphrase?
You evaluate their flexibility. If approximation didn't work, did they instantly pivot to circumlocution, or did they just repeat the exact same broken sentence louder?
You are grading the resilience and agility of the communication, not the polish of the syntax.
And mechanically, how do we track that for a gradebook?
You must design and utilize specific analytical rubrics. Your rubric cannot just have categories for fluency, vocabulary, and grammar.
It must have a distinct, heavily weighted column, explicitly labeled strategic competence.
And the descriptors in that column should be concrete. Effectively uses circumlocution to overcome lexical gaps, or actively negotiates meaning and requests clarification when comprehension fails.
You need observation scales to tally how frequently and successfully a student attempts an achievement strategy over a semester.
And this demands a massive shift in how we provide feedback, doesn't it?
If a student completely butchers the grammar of a sentence, but successfully uses a wild gesture and a brilliant paraphrase to get a complex point across, What does the teacher say?
If you only correct the butchered grammar, you kill the strategy. You reinforce the toxic idea that if you can't say it perfectly, you shouldn't say it at all.
Your feedback must explicitly validate the safety net. You have to stop the class and say, wait, look at what Leo just did.
He didn't know the word for hinge, so he used his hands to show the motion and described it as the metal elbow of the door.
That was a brilliant circumlocution. Everyone write that down.
You praise the repair mechanism. By highlighting and rewarding the successful strategic choice, you reinforce the exact behavior you want to cultivate.
You teach them that bravery in communication is valued higher than sterile accuracy. Praise the safety net, not just the tightrope walk. I love that.
It really reframes the whole classroom dynamic.
Okay, we have traversed an immense amount of theoretical and practical ground today. Let's synthesize this journey into a tight, cohesive conclusion that you can carry directly into the final paragraph of your exam essay.
The conclusion must bring all the threads together. You must reiterate that communication strategies are absolutely not peripheral secondary skills, and they are never signs of deficiency.
They are the essential, active tools of real-world interaction.
They are a fundamental dimension of overall communicative competence, permanently validated by Canal and Swain.
Most importantly, they are the cognitive engines that drive learner autonomy, lower anxiety, and promote the vital noticing required for interlanguage development.
And in the classroom, they cannot be left to chance. They must be explicitly modeled, practiced under genuine communicative pressure, and deliberately assessed using specialized rubrics.
Exactly. If your exam essay clearly articulates that trajectory, from Sunlinker's interlanguage and the rejection of the deficit model, through the architectural framework of Canale and Swain, directly into the concrete reality of information gaps and strategic rubrics,
You will present a comprehensive, highly impressive understanding of modern language pedagogy.
we hope this deep dive has provided not just the academic terminology, but the structural understanding and the cognitive mechanisms you need to absolutely master Topic 40.
It's all about connecting the theory to the practice.
Now, as you organize your notes and prepare to tackle that blank exam paper, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to ponder. We have talked extensively about balancing linguistic competence with strategic competence.
Right.
Imagine an extreme scenario. Imagine two individuals from completely different parts of the world. They share absolutely zero first language background.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
They are dropped into a room together and given a complex, vital task to complete. Say, defusing a simulated device or assembling a complicated structure.
A real high-stakes situation.
Let's assume their grammatical and lexical competence in any shared target language is functionally zero. They barely share 10 words.
Wow.
But hypothetically, their strategic competence, their ability to utilize spatial awareness, multimodal gesturing, microexpressions, extreme approximation, and an unrelenting creative will to establish meaning is completely maxed out.
Maxed out strategic competence.
What does that interaction actually look like? In the complete absence of syntax, how much complex, nuanced human thought can actually be transmitted purely through the architecture of strategy?
Could they solve a complex problem using nothing but mime, approximation, and sheer will to connect?
Could they solve the puzzle using nothing but the safety net? Something to think about. Good luck with your exam preparation.